Villains, gangsters, or faces as they prefer to be called, are the people that have been making newspaper headlines for all the wrong reasons over the past 50 years.
You play, you get hurt. Simple.
Some are instantly recognisable, but many are not.
If you have the name Don, that's it, you're finished.
In this second series, some of those involved in the underworld's most infamous crimes have agreed to go on camera to tell how things happened and why.
I'm an old man now, but I can shoot and stab as well as anybody else.
My name is Bernard O'Mahony. I was a friend of the Cray twins and a key member of the Essex Boys firm.
And everyone seems to think that I had something to do with the actual killings of them when they actually got killed in the Range Rover. And this was something that Damon tried to impress. He wanted to be like that.
I know this world, I know these faces, and I am going to take you on a journey into the heart of the underworld.
I'm shackled to a chair, battered, guns out of my head constantly. Just 3 days of non-stop beatings and torture.
But he's not dead now.
He's not dead. He's not dead. Yet.
This guy always finishes on top.
Think of Liverpool and the mind will conjure up images of poor social housing, high unemployment and abject poverty. Back in the 1800s it was a prosperous place to live because of the success of its port. But that success had been built upon a history of extreme human suffering. By the close of the 18th century, 40% of the world's slaves were transported on ships that had voyaged from Liverpool. The vast profits from this abhorrent trade transformed Liverpool into one of Britain's leading cities. Stephen French, known in the underworld as the Devil, grew up in Liverpool and earned his moniker by terrorising, torturing and robbing drug dealers. A direct descendant of the slaves that arrived in the port, he believes that the racist views that permitted slavery still exist in the city and beyond.
I'm a product of the African slave trade and the Irish potato famine. All my ancestors managed to survive that horrific crossing of the Atlantic. So out of a ship of 300, 100 would turn up, and those at the bottom, crushed and mashed, were called nitty-gritty. My heritage is nitty-gritty. On the black side. On the white side, the Irish came. The Irish Holocaust, the potato famine, and they turned up here and they ended up in the port of Liverpool. The wealth of Liverpool is built on slavery. All the fancy buildings in the city centre, all built on the backs of blacks. You've got a road called Penny Lane. It's a great Beatles song. I've wrote to the council numerous times asking them to change the name from Penny Lane to Freedom Lane. Because the simple path, it's a homage to a slave trader. You can't talk about the drugs, you can't talk about the economy without talking about slavery. You can't talk about without talking about the racism. I remember the conservative slogans from the 1970s. If you want a nigger for the neighbour, vote Labour. Rooms to rent. No Irish, no blacks, no dogs. Why do you think we were so furious? Why do you think that we set the city on fire? The only individual that got it harder than a Scouser was a black Scouser. You've got to understand what makes me who I am and the way I am and the ferocity that's in my genes. We landed here 400 years ago. It took us 400 years to get from the docks to the top of Parliament Street. People forget the history. So I became a ferocious robber baron. Individuals like me, Curtis, lots of us turned to a life of crime. So you've always got to look at the history of why individuals are the way they are.
Slavery was abolished in 1833, but Liverpool continued to benefit from international trade. By the end of the Second World War, the city's heyday was over. As Britain traded more with Europe, Liverpool found itself on the wrong coast. As businesses failed and unemployment figures soared, the ever-resourceful Scouse villains used the port to import drugs from all four corners of the globe. On the streets and in clubland, drugs created an extremely competitive market. Fistfights in the underworld were soon replaced with gun battles. Liverpool and other cities throughout the mainland would never be the same again. Former martial arts world champion and doorman Gary Sandland witnessed this violent transition. When drugs were introduced to clubland, did the violence change?
It went from being drunken guys who want to shout and scream and be rowdy to tablets, ecstasy and the likes. Then you get into the coke, where people can get aggressive. When tablets and coke became involved, that's when the money side comes involved. And that's when a guy comes to the door and you search him and he's got a bag of pills the size of a bag of crisps. Well, he hasn't fronted them. Some big gang member somewhere has fronted that. So you take them off him or someone else does, then there's going to be murder. I've been involved in many, many serious incidents. I had 96 fights, 52 pro, 44 amateur. As a kickboxer, I ended up being world heavyweight champion. And I was world heavyweight champion for 7 years with 14 title defences. My very worst fight was in a big club, the biggest club at one time in the area. It's now since been closed down and demolished. On this particular time, there was a door security firm that come looking for somebody. They came into the nightclub that I was running. They came in early looking for the head doorman on the place at the time. 2 doormen at the front, glass doors, fronted them. What are you looking for? We're looking for a couple of guys. Don't know them. Instantly, these 14 or so guys knocked these doormen out and tried to barge through the doors. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I was just inside the doors. I steps out with my best buddy, Steve, and immediately had to start fighting. I was hit immediately with a knuckle duster which damaged the side of my face badly at the time, but I retaliated with a punch which put the guy through the window. My best buddy kicks one of the running up guys who's got a knife in his hand. Luckily for us, we're on about a flight of 5 steps. This guy flies into them and knocks them down like a Skittles. They jump up, pull the knives out, one had a chain, run at us, and we were just fighting for our lives. The owner's son of the club came out, was grabbed hold of, fell on the floor and was stabbed 7 times. The other doorman had the bottle smashed into his face, 35 stitches right down his face, and was unconscious. The other 2 doormen were lying on the floor unconscious and were getting kicked to death virtually and literally. Anyway, we managed to keep fighting and managed to force them back because we had the advantage of the steps, and there was only the 3 of us left fighting because the other 2 doormen had come round and been knocked out with the bottle. The other one had a piece of 3x2 had been smashed in the face. It was carnage. It was horrendous. Several guys stabbed. The owner stabbed 7 times, and eventually they backed off and made a run for it. The story carries on from there because later that evening I was contacted to say, listen, you better get down here to a meeting of different gangs to say, look, if this problem isn't resolved tonight, we're going up, or someone will go up to the hospital and they'll shoot the guy dead in bed, the owner's son. If any names are mentioned, if it goes any further. So there's going to be a bloodbath. Sort it out. We spoke. We decided, yeah, there'll be no witnesses, there'll be no statements, and that was the end of that one. 2 people nearly died. One was blinded, virtually, and 4 or 5 knocked out and trampled on, and serious injuries.
The drugs that fueled the combatants involved in these gangland brawls generally arrived in the UK on small boats. The smugglers themselves were not hardened criminals, at least not in the early days. Boris Bossameni, an ex-naval seaman, soon discovered a more lucrative career in drug smuggling.
Basically what was happening is that all these guys got onto the fact that a bit of smoke was worth loads of money. What started off as just a couple of kilos here, a couple of kilos there, started to become tens of kilos, hundreds of kilos, and they're getting money, strong money, but they ain't criminals. And of course, on occasions, these boys are getting caught. They're going to prison where your average gangster looks at them and thinks, these ain't proper criminals, but they've got loads of money, loads of money. And your average gangster thinks, well, I want a slice of the pie. So what was predominantly like a public schoolboy educated sort of business slowly entered the criminal mentality, the criminal world, where they start to see the actual huge profits in drug. So from the 70s, as the business progressed, it got more in the control by gangsters.
Bossameni and fellow public schoolboys like Howard Marks had no criminal background before they became immersed in drug smuggling. But when villains identified their nautical skills and the profits to be made, they were soon recruited.
I was in the Navy when I was young. When I left the Navy, I went to Spain, and because of my skills in the Navy, I was an engineer and diver on submarines. It became obvious to me almost immediately my skills were wanted as a smuggler, and I was approached by several gangs, for want of a better word, in Spain. Do you want to run a bit of hash? And after a little bit of thought, sounded like a bit of fun, sounded like a bit of an adventure. I was looking for an adventure, so I sort of agreed to get involved. My first job was on a boat called Marilyn. We shoot off to Morocco. We're supposed to be picking up an amount of hash. It turned out it was like 300 or 400 kilos. We brought into Spain gear at the time that was worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. So we'd gone from basically nothing to having hundreds of thousands of pounds on the firm in the period of a week. And of course, got the bug for it all. And that was sort of my introduction to smuggling.
Having made one successful voyage, Bossameni and his more experienced partner, Ronald Puff Daddy Donati, were soon in demand. Liverpool's notorious international drug smuggler Curtis Warren hired them to smuggle tons of cannabis.
Once we brought the first load into Spain, Ron, the guy behind it all, he had somehow, don't know how, but he'd run into Curtis's lieutenants basically down in Spain somewhere, and these guys agreed to buy every bit of swag that we could get out of Morocco. With the proceeds of the first run, we bought a much bigger boat. So we took some into Spain, then we started to get a bit more ambitious, but it resulted in the customs and excise sort of, they launched this massive undercover operation to capture us called Operation Nebby, and there was basically a big ambush waiting for us in England. We get back to the Isle of Wight, we're sailing up the Solent, and 4 English gunboats come on the boat, light aircraft and helicopter. I don't know what the customs were thinking at the time, but for some reason the customs believed that at that moment in time we threw a load of contraband off the boat, to which we were duly arrested, put on remand in Bristol, where we was held for 15 months.
For a number of years, Bossameni shipped drugs between England and Spain. Like all drug dealers, he was eventually caught and imprisoned. However, drug dealers such as Curtis Warren continued to flourish. He ensured that he could not be linked to any importations, instead hiring underlings to undertake any risks. Brian Charrington, a Middlesbrough-based entrepreneur, shared his knowledge of drug smuggling with Warren. Charrington later recruited his son Brian Jr. to help their operations.
My dad and Curtis Warren, they were sort of pioneers in their area, you know. I mean, they were the first people really to go out into South America and get into it like they were doing at the time in Miami in big volume, you know. So they sort of went and done that, them two. What sort of working relationship they had, I know they'd done a few deals together, you know what I mean? They never necessarily started off together, but their paths crossed when they were climbing the ladder, so to speak, and yeah, they ended up doing quite a few things together.
In 1992, Paul Grimes' 21-year-old son died after taking heroin. Grimes, a notorious Merseyside villain, vowed to have his revenge and became a registered informant for customs and excise. After discovering Warren and Charrington planned to import 500 kilograms of cocaine, he told his handlers and they put the gang under surveillance.
There was 2 shipments, each of 500 kilos of coke from Venezuela, and it was the lead ingot case, the infamous lead ingot case. It was very well hidden, the cocaine, inside these massive lead ingots, you know, which would weight big ships down in harbour and things like that. They were in containers shipped over from Venezuela. Deep inside, they had parcels of coke in them. So one shipment got through at 500 kilo, and they caught the other one. Yeah, so that was down to Paul Grimes being an informer. You know, that went to trial. Obviously, the first shipment had got through, and my dad's brother, my uncle David, he was still out. I don't think he was arrested at that time, you know. I think he got wind of it and he was off. So he was able to deal with that shipment, you know, especially my dad's side of it and his. So after the case fell apart, my old man was able to sort of collect his cash and then emigrate, you know, get out of the country sharpish. But it was down to the testimony of Harry Naggs and Ian Whedon that the whole case fell apart.
Charrington had been a registered informant for Detective Sergeant Ian Whedon and Detective Inspector Harry Naggs, and they had pleaded with the court to allow him to continue in his role, as they wanted to arrest UK villains involved with the South American cartels. The pleas were successful, and when Charrington walked free, the case against Warren collapsed. A few months later, Naggs was seen by customs at Dover driving a £70,000 BMW into the country. The luxury German car was registered in the name of Brian Charrington. According to his son, Charrington had been friends with both officers for years.
A story I remember him telling me, he coupled up with a police officer called Ian Whedon, who was a PC at the time, which he sort of later formed a gang called the Sledgehammer Gang with. So as Ian would be out on his routes of an evening, patrolling, they'd go and wreck a jewellery shop. My dad would go and hit it up with a sledgehammer, steal all the goods, and wait for Ian to put the call in, you know what I mean? So hence letting him get away from it all. So they had a good system set up between them, and I guess they sort of grew from there with everything that they'd done together, you know.
Because the authorities believed that Charrington was a bona fide informant involved in the South American cartels, he and his family were moved to Australia for their own safety. However, the Charringtons didn't settle and were soon back in Europe plying their illicit trade.
Me, my mum, my two younger brothers and my dad, we all went to Australia. We intended on staying there. We went to Perth, we toured a little bit, you know. But it just didn't feel like home at the end of the day, so, you know, we stayed around 4-5 months over there, went to Spain, and that's where we settled. And that was really where my journey began with my dad, you know, where he sort of took me under his wing then at that point. We sort of stayed clean for a while, and I sort of got close to my dad, like I was saying. And then we said, you know, he said, should we get into this? And I think he was itchy. He loves the game, you know. He loves being involved in the smuggling world. He loves being able to plan things out and to be able to sort of make things happen like that. So yeah, we ended up then again working from Morocco with the hash. He had the contacts in Morocco anyway, so they were laying dormant all that time, you know. But it was fun going over there and being introduced to all that world, that sort of Arab world and a different culture, and then getting right in with the younger generation. The old man who my dad was working with, I was involved with his sons, you know, so we'd sort of upped it another level. We bought this enormous ship called the Simon de Dancer. We put a bottom in the ship so that it would, if there was any issues, anyone boarding or any issues at all, it would open and the cargo would fall. So it was all pretty well thought out. That ship got sent to Morocco, picked up 4,000 kilos of hash. It was caught off the coast. For that case, my dad was then arrested. I was in Exeter at the time, and I was staying at my uncle's house, my uncle David's house. We were both arrested there. My dad was arrested in Spain, and obviously the whole crew and the boat had been confiscated. That case also fell apart for something really trivial. I mean, they caught the boat banged to rights with the cargo on it, and it fell apart because they didn't have the proper boarding authorization. So for something so trivial, again, my dad was let free. We all were at that point, and you know, the name Teflon Don sort of become a bit more of a name that stuck.
Undeterred by the efforts of the authorities to bring them down, the Charringtons travelled to South America to set up yet another lucrative route to import drugs into Europe.
And I wanted to set something up over in Germany. So me and my dad spoke about it. He said, okay, we'll go over to South America. So I acquired myself a false passport under the name Michael Crozier. Went over to South America and sorted out a few things there. I mean, an amazing place, and the guys we were actually dealing with who we'd not met, these are these real old school sort of big-time coke people, you know. I mean, fascinating big ranches that they owned. As far as the eye could see, stables with horses, each of $100,000, you know. We sat there one evening with this boss, call him the Jefe, you know, and we're doing all kinds of chicken fighting there and cock fighting and stuff, and the guys there with just piles and piles, tens and tens of thousands of dollars just betting crazy, you know. So it was an experience to go there and to be involved in that from the ground up. And I had a friend who was a pilot for Lufthansa, so he was prepared to bring the merchandise for me over to Germany. And the first shipment sent 50 kilos of coke. I mean, I guess you could say it's probably worth about $1 million to us at that point. That cocaine arrived. When I went to pick it up in a warehouse, I got arrested there with another guy who was just a driver. My intention was to take it to Frankfurt and put it on a helicopter, which I had on standby, and send it over to Holland, you know. So I was arrested for that, convicted, arrested under the name of Michael Crozier, because I went over to Germany with my false passport. I ended up spending 1.5 years on that name, convicted as Michael Crozier. So I was really happy at that point, thinking, you know, I was sentenced to 7 years and 3 months for that crime. And I was quite happy thinking that my name would be clear anyway, at the end of it. Anyway, down to the people who were visiting me in Germany, I guess they figured out who I was. I was sent this file about this big with my whole history of my family tree. They knew more about my family history than I did, in fact. When my dad went away, he was with a girl called Natalie, and she was there in Spain, and she started to help me run the business. Anyway, she and I ended up falling in love, falling for each other, you know. And this just became so difficult for us, you know. Me and my dad had such a close relationship since I'm a young man. Natalie and I falling in love was just like totally, it just threw us for a six, really, you know. And I had to say something. I had to tell my dad, you know, hey, this is for real here, you know. It's confusing. Natalie and I are still together, and we have 3 beautiful daughters, 10 years on, you know. But he still couldn't get over that. He couldn't get past that. Anyway, one night it ended up coming to a head, and we fought, and I ended up hospitalising my dad, unfortunately, you know.
Initially, Brian Charrington Sr. vented his anger on Natalie. Still dissatisfied, he sent a gang of henchmen to punish his son.
There was some guys sent round to my house to... What their intentions were it remains unclear, but they turned up with knives, duct tape, got hold of my missus while my little daughter's in bed, put a knife to her throat. It was only because of her pure screaming and fighting, alerting the neighbours and that they had to run off. They had no choice, but, you know, God knows what would have happened. Later on, I was outside of my house. I just bought a new car, just bought a new Jaguar, so I was messing around with the boot. Van pulls up, door opens, bang, I'm in there, getting just pummeled, beaten. Ends up in a warehouse, you know, I'm shackled to a chair, battered, guns out of my head constantly, just 3 days of non-stop beatings and torture. I mean, I don't want to be too graphic, you know what I mean? It was guns going up my arse, and it was just a terrible ordeal, terrible ordeal. And so, you know, this was because of hospitalising my dad, obviously.
There were no demands for money?
There were no demands, no. It was a simple, you know, telling off. And that's how he chose to spank me. This is the sort of character that my dad became later on, you know, an extremely violent and just an awful kind of guy, really.
Awful kind of guys demanding respect is the norm in the drugs world. The Fitzgibbons are one of Liverpool's most violent drug-dealing families. One evening they got involved in a trivial dispute at a nightclub that ended in all-out war with an equally notorious family led by one of Merseyside's most feared villains, Nicky Ayres. With Ayres that night was friend and fellow drug smuggler Kevin Mooney. The fight ended with one of the Fitzgibbons being badly injured, and the following day they had their revenge.
This one Sunday, it all kicked off and quite bad. It was the worst I've ever seen. I can still see it vividly in my mind now, you know, it's over 20 years ago. And I'm only young at this time, as I said to you before, you know, I was never a fighter until then. Next minute I seen one of our doormen walk to us, and he had blood pissing out of him there, being stabbed right through there. I was still looking down the back, and my mate was walking through, And he was just walking through and he was just banging people, and he was just going, falling. His shirt was ripped off and blood down his kicks. They had someone out the back and that, and it smashed it all over the shop with bottles and that, you know. We found out that this lad who had lost his eye and that was related to this family. You know, they're a big family here. They haven't got a very good name for themselves at all, you know, they're not well liked. They've come down on the bounce on the Monday. There's 2 carloads of them. Come down Daisy Lane. It's right up where Liverpool's training ground is, Liverpool FC's training ground is. We come down there, my mates have been there. One of them's jumped out and said what happened in Silks last night. Before he's had time to answer, like, he stole on him. So next minute, the other lads just jumped in, started getting and stuck into them. And I don't think they were expecting it, you know what I mean? Because not many people stood up to them at that time. My mates have ended up fucking chasing them all the way up the lane and that. One of them's had an axe on him all the time, running away. She runs into this pizza parlour, drops the axe down. My mate just gets the axe off the floor, fuck off, straight into his head.
A few days later, Mooney was drinking outside a pub called the Derby Arms in Liverpool when an armed motorcyclist drove past, opening fire on him, Nicky Ayres and their associates.
Everyone stood outside. There's a few cars parked outside the boozer. We were all on the footpath there. But me and Nicky have gone in the bar. I've come out with fucking 2 bottles of Diet White in my hand. As we're coming out, the call had already been given. That this is them. Me and Nicky walking out. I'm that side, this side here. Nicky's that side of me. The bike's coming that way, and I've just seen his face in that, and I just see it in that position. Then he's just gone boom, let the first one go, and I've just seen obviously the blue flame come out and that, and the first one hit me. I've gone to the left, ran left, and he's still firing. At first, I felt someone had just gone like that in the back of my leg, and then it just got worse and worse, and then fucking hell, it was like the burning set in. I said, look, and it gone right through. Found out it was a 45 that I'd been hit with. My mate who I worked for and that, he picked me up in his arms and that, carried me to the car, and he said, get him to fucking hospital now.
When Mooney arrived at the hospital, the authorities telephoned his family.
They phoned my mum, and obviously they wouldn't explain on the phone to my mum, who's your next of kin, give me mum's phone number. So they wouldn't explain what happened. You know what I mean? I'll just tell, you know, somebody's mother, sorry, your son's been shot, can you come down to Aussie? They said, your son's been involved in an accident. So then she'd come to hospital and that, and said, what's happened? Have you been ran over or something? I said, no, I've been shot. And the look on her face was just like, you know, my son, you know, who I've raised and all that, and, you know, he's been shot, and I always remember, it's the most dreadful thing I've ever said in my life, and I said to her, I said, listen, if you want to start crying, you can fuck off, and I'll never ever forgive myself for that for the rest of my life.
Despite suffering an horrific injury and massive blood loss, Mooney refused to cooperate with the police. But his adversaries appeared to be a lot more helpful after one of the Fitzgibbons was shot in a revenge attack.
When I was in hospital, and as soon as they were there, the police and that, and I said, well, I'm not making a complaint. I signed the Bobby's handbook and that. They fucked off, took my arm guard off me. But then when he's in hospital, after being shot, he has an arm guard, and the whole time he's there, so what does that tell you? You know? There's a big difference. You know, I've made no complaints, my arm guard's gone. You know? I've got no proof that he made a complaint, but he had an arm guard and the whole time he was there.
So the suggestion is he did assist the police?
Work it out for yourself.
After making a full recovery, Mooney left Liverpool and settled in the Channel Islands, where he and Nicky Ayres tried to take control of the local booming drugs trade. They were eventually apprehended importing a batch of ecstasy and 30 kilos of cannabis. Mooney was in prison for 8 years, Ayres for 6.
That was my first sentence and that. Going in with someone like Nicky who'd done numerous sentences and that. He gave me good advice from when we first went in there. He just said to me, listen, I don't want you fucking around in here. He said, I want you getting your head into education and stuff.
Following his release, the Jersey police kept a close eye on Mooney and it wasn't long before he was back behind bars.
I got fucking raided in April, and the prick sent me back to prison for a copied DVD. So I had to go back to prison for another 2 months for a copied DVD. You know what I mean? Just that they wanted me back in there.
And was the DVD of anything sinister?
With fucking Gran Torino with Clint Eastwood. They took one and left about 20. It was just enough to check, just enough to caution me to recall me to prison to do another 2 months. And 2 weeks later, I was fucking nicked again.
What was that for?
It's the Kia Skunk. Kia Skunk and these tablets called BZP. That are like a medical medicine type of ecstasy, you know. But I was the last one charged in Jersey under the medicines law for them. So I've now been graded up to I think it's a class, not sure it's a B or a C. But they were that convinced they'd got me with ecstasy. They changed the law. They actually changed the law on the 22nd of November, 2009. I always remember what the cop was looking at me, he was laughing at me. He said, "You're going away for another 10 years for this, you prick." He was rubbing his hands together.
While Mooney yo-yoed in and out of prison, his friend Nicky Ayres returned to Liverpool, where he became embroiled in a feud about drugs with a man named James Pancake Taylor. Pancake earned his moniker because he is known as an extremely violent man that easily flips. In one incident, a man was stabbed in the hand. In another, somebody attempted to kill Ayres with a samurai sword. A transit van entered the car park and shots were fired at the swordsman. A few days later, Ayres and Taylor both pulled out guns before onlookers managed to calm the situation. That night, Ayres' pet dog was kidnapped, doused in petrol and set on fire. Then in April 2010, Ayres was shot dead outside his daughter's home.
I knew, that he was, having bothered with someone, and I always remember going to someone and saying, this is going to end up bad, this, for one of them, I just come out of my cell, 30th of April 2010. I come out of my cell, and a lad shouts me down from the twos and said, "Have you seen the paper?" And this was the local paper, the Jersey paper. And I said, "No, what's in it?" He said, "Come and have a look, you best come and have a look." And as soon as I read it, I knew. I had to go to the phone to confirm it, and I just said, "Go on." I didn't say nothing else, I said, "Go on." And he just said, "Yeah, and it is him." I'd known Nicky since I was about 10 years old, and that, it was more his younger brother that I grew up with playing football and stuff. He was well liked by everyone, all the lads liked him, and they still talk about over there now, and it's just, it's a shame. I feel for his family and that, more than anything, because the murder, remains unsolved, as we all know,
The Grisdale estate in Everton, North Liverpool, was once one of the most deprived areas in Britain. 1 in 8 of the estate's population had convictions for drugs, firearms or violence. Many families with little or no income had turned to the drug trade as an alternative means of supporting themselves and their loved ones.
I think regarding getting involved in crime came with having a young family and no money. And then we met people who were quite big in Liverpool at the time, dealing drugs and stuff. And we became part in just minding drugs at first, at the young ages. And it just snowballed. Years and years later, I wouldn't say we became big, but we became where we were earning good money. And we became part of a big organised gang.
One of the most feared families in the area was the G's. They had a reputation for unspeakable violence.
I know Adam really well. He went with one of my friend's daughters as well. He used to go out with her as a young lad. And, they were from a hard background, a hard area, 5 boys. They didn't have much money either, and we all got involved in the same thing. But we had other friends, William and John Moore, they were brothers. They were quite older than all of us. They were like 15 years older. And a feud started to occur in 2003 between John and Darren, which then, just because you're mates with someone, involves everyone to do with that gang.
When you say there's a feud, what sort of things are happening?
Just fights and cars getting smashed up and people smashing windscreens and threatenings and fights on the main roads and just stuff that escalated out of control to where we are, just a mess. It just ended up in a mess.
Those caught up in the mess included Tony Richardson, one-time fiancé of actress Jennifer Ellison. Their home was sprayed with bullets. The same week, a massive car bomb exploded outside Club 051. 6 days later, a hand grenade was thrown into a packed pub. On New Year's Day 2004, the killings began. 19-year-old Danny MacDonald, who was said to be responsible for the grenade attack, was murdered. 4 months later, innocent teenager Craig Barker was shot dead. Darren G, the intended target, survived.
There was a killing of an innocent young lad when the people wanted to kill Darren. Craig Barker was actually killed by mistake, which sadly is a young life lost. He was another good young lad. A hitman was hired. The hitman was meant to have killed Darren but killed Craig. They did change seats that night due to Darren wanting to play on a console in the back of his vehicle. The phone call I got was that Darren had died, and weirdly enough, I started crying because at that time I knew David and Darren were having words, but it didn't affect how I felt for Darren because I've known Darren since young and I did like him. It didn't surface for hours later that it was young Craig.
3 days after Craig Barker's murder, 18-year-old Michael Singleton was chased into his neighbour's home by a gunman. Cornered in the kitchen, Singleton was shot 4 times in the head and body and died shortly afterwards.
There was a young lad from Scotland Road whose family I know, Michael Singleton. He was killed regarding revenge shootings. Michael was shot in a kitchen of somebody's house, point blank in the head.
The Regans tried hard to remain impartial during the feud, as they were friends with both the Moores and the Gs. However, drug-fueled paranoia led to Darren G believing that Nicky's husband David had been involved in the attempt on his life, and tensions between the two rose.
Darren had problems with another gang from another area. Had a paranoid image that everybody was trying to get him, which was totally wrong as well. But unfortunately, that's what Darren had in his head. David had received a number of threatening phone calls up until the day of his death, saying that he'd been the driver of the vehicle, they were going to do this, they were going to do that. And David being David, he just went to his business location, opened up that morning as usual. And I was in Manchester and Altrincham at the time, and the news was on and it was the car wash. There was 3 people in one car, and one gunman jumped out the vehicle, and in the car wash there's a little tiny wall, it must only be a foot high. And he's come out of his vehicle, Davey, and must have been trying to get away, and they've shot him in his back and his legs. Shot in the back 3 times. When David got killed and the police came, a few weeks later, they came up my path and they'd said, I'd already had a phone call saying they'd arrested Darren. And I said, please tell me it's not Darren. And he said, yeah. And I remember falling to my knees and saying no, because I didn't want it to be him. And it was him. And we've had to live with it ever since. Darren was convicted because his Galaxy apparently was on CCTV a bit further up the road, probably making sure the killing had been done. All a mess for nothing. 2 people killed innocently, Craig and Davey. Just a mess.
For drugs?
For drugs, yeah. And let's be honest, it was for drugs, for money. Not Craig, because Craig wasn't involved in nothing but through mistaken being drivers of vehicles, but it still all boils down to drugs, doesn't it, at the end of the day?
Prior to her husband's murder, Nicky had ended their relationship after falling for her childhood friend William Moore. He comforted grieving Nicky whilst feigning shock at the senseless slaughter. He knew David Regan had been targeted in revenge for the botched attack on G, but he claimed it was all a terrible mistake because there wasn't any reason why the Gs should think Regan or his friends were involved.
I've known Willie 30 years now. I've lived on the same estate, the estate next to the Grisdale. Willie was lovely. Willie was just Willie. He was involved in whatever he was involved with years ago and then tried to sort himself out and not be involved and stuff. He was a nice man. He's my son's godfather. I was split from David when David was killed, but still married to him. And then started a relationship with William Moore for a few months, and then he was arrested for the murder of Craig. So that put me in a lot of shock, because it all then started to be connected. Willie was away for 9 years, for drugs. And he'd met Darren on this sentence. Darren Moore's house. Became friends with Darren Moore's house, and then associated with Darren Moore's house on the outside. He was an ex-army, an ex-soldier, posed to be the SAS, and he's meant to have hired him to do the killing of G. Waterhouse was from Luton. Came up in his own vehicle, used his own telephones, brought his dog, and was meant to have been paid a large amount of money to be a hitman. The Mondeo was just circling and circling, and then just opened fire. A hitman who was William Moore's friend.
It's hard not to feel sympathy for Nicky Regan, but she chose to immerse herself in a world where apathy, sympathy and regret have no meaning.
When I first met Davey, we were just kids with nothing. He was a painter and decorator. I wouldn't change meeting him. I'd change the roads we went down. Big time.
It is an established fact that the Port of Liverpool has a long history of facilitating huge drug importations, and this has contributed to social decay and fractured communities within the city. The more traditional criminals such as Charlie Seeger were replaced by fearless, trigger-happy youths who use guns regardless of the devastation caused. Today, Liverpool's docks have been gentrified as the city attempts to move on from its grim reputation. Whether this is a sign of things to come remains to be seen.
And do you honestly think anything will change?
No. No, I think that nothing's going to change. I think they're going two ways. The poverty areas, you're going two ways. You're dead or you're going to jail. Sadly, that's the way it is. Liverpool itself is a hard city to live. It's a very image-orientated city. And if you're from a family who's got nothing, and each parent wants better for the children, they want to be able to give the children the trainers they want, or the tracksuits, or the clothes. We all want to do that. But it's just, sometimes I think our kids in Liverpool want to belong to a gang just to belong. The authorities and that, yeah, they police it, but they don't see what they're living like. They don't see how they're coping day to day.
And what's the future for kids in these poverty estates?
I don't think there is one. I don't think there is one. But when you're living it and you're driving them 60, 70 grand cars, you don't give a shit. You don't give a shit. It's now that you give a shit. When you're looking at your kids growing up in the next generation, that you think shit.
But, you know, you're saying Liverpool's a shithole and poverty in it, but having drugs made, haven't you and others made it a shithole?
Yeah, we have, yeah. Yeah, I think we have, yeah.
drugs.
Yeah, we've run it into the ground with the drugs, yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. And the crime there is for drugs. It is for drugs. Anfield is a bad area. It's a bad area. Not all parts of Liverpool are shitholes at all. You've got the really lovely parts, believe it or not. But them areas I'm from, yeah, we did play a big part, and we ruined it. And I know everyone to do with me, sitting in a cell or out of a cell, knows they played a part in that, because we did. And now, are we paying the price for that? Yeah, we are. Yeah, we are, and yeah, we have. And I think we're going to pay the price for the rest of our lives.
Drugs were not the only cargo imported into Liverpool which changed the city's makeup. Thousands of Irish immigrants arrived as they fled what later became known as the Irish Holocaust or the Potato Famine. By 1851, approximately 25% of the city's population was Irish-born. Like many Irish men before him, my father boarded a ship for Liverpool seeking work. He was aged 15. Unable to secure employment in the city, he learned of vacancies at a hotel in Birmingham. He caught a train later the same day and started work in the industrial city the following morning. It's the city I grew up in and my next destination on Faces of the Underworld.